Hola, WhoDey Nation en español. ¿Cómo están? Los saluda Orson Ge. And in this special occasion, I'm joined by John Sheeran from Cincy Jungle. I'm sure a lot of you know him, and of course, most of you have read him. John, it's great to have you here on the show, especially today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Orson.
More than glad, and as I told you before, I'm real glad that we're gonna be able to talk about our Bengals win in this stance in which, we're not normally included on the NFL plans, and after all, it's happened, and the Bengals are facing the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship. How do you feel about it? How do you see yesterday's game?
Yeah, man, like when we agreed to do this last week, I didn't have a ton of expectations going into this game. I kind of accepted whatever outcome was going to happen because I have a great deal of respect for the Bills and their team and just the way that they operate their offense and how Josh Allen is this moose who plays quarterback who can throw the ball 70 yards, but it forces your defense to play 11 on 11, and it really puts your defense in a bind. But if you had told me that Lou Anarumo would conjure up a scheme and a defense that could limit him to 200 and so yards and interception, like I could have bought that, right? Like I could have bought the Bills having like an off day on offense. If you had told me that Joe Burrow had like a solid game, right? 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, very efficient, got the ball out quickly, like I could buy that. But if you had told me that he wouldn't be hit nearly as much as Josh Allen, if you had told me that the Bengals offense would rush for 170 yards with 3 backup offensive linemen, like Orson, that was my biggest thing, man. Like the amount of communication, chemistry, cohesion with the offensive line and finding new schemes in terms of the run game and concepts that fit all these guys in such a short period of time after they ended the season when they couldn't really run the ball that well with all their 5 starters out there. That was by far the biggest surprise for me. It was the biggest takeaway. It ultimately made this a 3-score game instead of maybe like a 1-score game at the end.
Absolutely, and as you said, Lou Anarumo has a lot to do with it. I'm sure that he's going to be getting some calls after these playoffs. But anyhow, and taking a little bit apart the coaching schemes and of course the game plan and the preparations, I think we should point out to Joe Burrow's character, because this whole animosity before the game with the coin toss before going to wild card, and then the the big bulletin board about Kansas City being able to, and of course Buffalo as well, to sell some tickets, and this disrespectfulness narrative kinds of feed up the whole animosity for the team, right?
Yeah, man. Like specifically with Burrow, he's just the ultimate. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to be myself, and I have total confidence in myself, my preparation. That's where you get a lot of people saying that he's cocky, he's arrogant. No, it's just, he carries himself with this level of confidence that is very rare, even for a star quarterback, right? Like you see it with Tom Brady, you saw it with Peyton Manning, and you're seeing it right now with Joe Burrow. He just has the ultimate level of trust and confidence in his ability and his preparation and with his teammates. Now that this team is just built so perfectly around him, and the team just feeds off of that confidence to just take on whatever adversity is kind of turned their way. Like this is 2 years now of this team just taking every single minor or major slight being thrown at them and then leveraging it to this extra added motivation, right? They're already the Bengals. They already carry this stigma of not coming up in the clutch moments, 30 years plus of no playoff victories and everything. Like they know the history, they know the lore of the franchise and the city. So that's already baked in there, right? The NFL won't give them the respect that they deserve until they really do establish themselves as these contenders. So when you have the coin toss thing, when you have the neutral site, when you have the pre-sale tickets being announced by NFL press releases, that just adds more fuel to the fire, and it's a dangerous combination for any team that has to go up against them.
And then you find out that Joe Burrow and of course the Bengals are 5-1 since he arrived to the team, since he came along. And record prior, I'm not going to mention it, is way the opposite side. So Joe Burrow has really changed the team spirits, like we all thought, like we all hoped for, and maybe for a good couple of years after, right?
I mean, you have all the pieces in here to, maintain sustainability, and I'm sure that's what a lot of Chiefs fans thought, right? When they got Mahomes in 2018 and they had the weapons and everything, and like what they've done, right? 5 consecutive AFC championships hosting, right? They've been to a couple of Super Bowls, they've won a Super Bowl. Like that's really hard to do, and people are going to look at, if they don't win this Super Bowl, right? Are the Chiefs like not this dynasty? Well, what they've done is really hard, and it took a lot, and they've managed to create a lot of success. And what the Bengals are doing right now, back-to-back AFC championship appearances, potentially back-to-back AFC titles, regardless of what happens, man. Like what they've done is incredibly impressive. It's not easy, but the most important thing, like the Chiefs and like any other perennial contenders, like the Patriots of the old, they have the most important pieces in place. They have this culture, they have the quarterback, they have the head coach, right? The coordinators may come and they may go, and we can have that conversation when it comes here, but everything is set up to, when that inevitable turnover happens, right? They have the pieces that make this go for years to come.
Absolutely. And now that you're talking about the right pieces, and of course, you mentioned it prior, the O line yesterday was really surprising. The Talking about the right pieces, well, you have Jackson Carman as the left tackle. You have Hakeem Adeniji as the right tackle, and then you find a Max Sharping that came on through waivers, and they actually did a great job yesterday. I mean, they were really impressive. Stats might tell you one thing, but what Joe Burrow was able to do, on the gun was really outstanding if you compare it for what happened in the couple of games prior against the Baltimore Ravens, and a few games also in the regular season.
Yeah, I think this is a combination of a lot of things. For one, like this whole season has been this progression of Burrow not turning those pressures into sacks like he was last year. And that's a combination of obviously avoiding sacks, but just getting the ball out quicker, getting down to his checkdowns a lot faster, and just being aware of where these pressures are coming from. And that progression and evolution has taken a toll. And it allows for situations like this, right? When you have an offensive line composed of 60% of the pieces are new, right? It allows for that to not completely blow up in your face in the form of like a 9-sack game against the Titans, right? And you have to move heaven and earth to overcome that. Instead, he gets sacked once against the Buffalo Bills. Now, granted, without Von Miller, Bills pass rush not the most strongest unit, but you like to think a not so strong defensive line against, on paper, not so strong offensive line that typically favors the defensive line, but not when you have a guy like Burrow who, again, gets the ball quickly. He's very agile in the pocket, and he knows where the ball needs to go, and he has these perfect mechanics, and he's always got his eyes upfield. So, obviously credit to the pieces that stepped up on the offensive line. That's another thing, man. Like we call these guys backups and reserves because they haven't played this year, but Max Sharpening, he was a second-round pick, multi-year starter for the Houston Texans. Jackson Carman, albeit his career didn't start very well, but he was drafted to be a starter in the second round. Had a lot of talent coming out of Clemson. It just took 2 years now for it to click at his natural position. So they've actually managed this to the point where they have, guys who have starting experience and starting caliber talent able to step up in these spots. Obviously, Hakeem Adeniji, a little bit different story. He has starting experience, but he wasn't as talented coming out and coming into the NFL as these other guys. But yeah, man, these pieces are just kind of clicking at the right moment, but they had kind of this reserve talent already baked in.
And spending a little bit more time in the O-line issues, maybe some of it, talking about specifically Jackson Carman, maybe a ton had to do with them coming back to his college position, to the original schematics of Jackson Carman. He suits, I think, better. He looks more natural when going as a left tackle than the experiments as guard. Maybe that's what Frank Pollock realized throughout the season.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah. So coming out of college, out of Clemson, you had Carman billed as a tackle going to guard because of concerns with his length, because of concerns with his foot speed, right? Could he match up with speed around the edge like he did at Clemson, right? But moving into guard, that's a totally different in terms of footwork, in terms of your pass sets, in terms of your timing. He was doing a lot of jump sets because like they felt like that's where his strengths would be maximized, and just his power in his pass protection technique. But it didn't really work out, right? Teams were just beating him with quickness, and he just wasn't getting the timing down with these sets. So then you put him back to his natural position at left tackle, and you're starting to see the footwork be a lot more natural, because that's where he took, pass sets for 7-8 years of his high school and college career. So things are starting to click with him again with that familiarity, and that's obviously not a bad thing, right? But it was still surprising to see them, go to him instead of like a guy like Isaiah Prince, who had been practicing at tackle for 2 years now. And said you have Carman, who's been at right guard, he's been at left guard, now he's practicing all 4 spots this season, but now he's back at left tackle, and it seems like it's really doing wonders for where his development is right now.
Absolutely. And we also need to talk about the run game, because I'm not sure everyone expected the Bengals to run so well last Sunday with such weather condition, and also considering the last couple of games. The Bengals did it real well, and it is mostly because of the adjustments on this offensive line.
Absolutely. Like, I want to shout out to Joe Goodberry, who I think put it perfectly on Twitter. All 5 of these guys have different skill sets. Like, obviously you have the chemistry of working together with Cordell Volson and Ted Karras. You have the athleticism with Akeem Adeniji. You have the just raw strength and power of guys like Max Sharpening and Jackson Carman, and the schemes and the concepts that Frank Pollock, Brian Callahan, Zach Taylor unloaded on the Bills fit these guys to a T, and it allowed for just displacement and just movement generating against the Bills for 60 minutes in a way that we just didn't expect, because it was all these moving parts, right? You didn't know how all 5 of these guys were going to be able to work together, what concepts are the zone or gap, like what was going to work with this group, but they just found the right, they pulled the right levers, right? They called the right plays with this group, and it allowed for Joe Mixon to just get a full head of steam. And when he has that space, then you start to see that power kind of unload with Joe Mixon, right? He was breaking tackles. He was getting yards after contact. Everything was just clicking in this environment where, like, the Bills just had no chance.
Yeah, and it was rather, I guess it took the whole league by surprise that the Bengals would dominate this game. And I'm not sure if this win will ever accomplish that. I mean, what I'm trying to get is that we as Bengals fans and Bengals reporters and people who cover the Bengals have already discarded the fluke narrative that happened a lot in the last playoffs. But some analysts, some names that are nationwide known, maybe had not changed their programming into the fluke narrative. I'm not sure if this game will accomplish that.
It's a good point. Like, I was thinking about this after the first 2 games this weekend, when you had the Jags and the Giants playing, and they both lost, but they both won a playoff game, right? They both they both took significant strides this season to kind of turn the franchises around, but no one pegged them to get past that round of the playoffs, right? So they lose, and the treatment is like, oh, well, they made great strides this season, the future is bright. Whereas with the Bengals last season, they were expected to maybe win one playoff game once they got to the playoffs, right? Just getting to the playoffs was already surprising enough. But once they were there, okay, you can beat the Raiders, but you're not going to beat the Titans. You're not going to beat the Chiefs. You're not going to almost beat the Rams in the Super Bowl. Because the Bengals overachieved so much in a season where it's like they're just a year early, people didn't expect that growth to continue. They expected them to just crash and burn and be just that one-year wonder. When, again, we just talked about, we just touched on it, they have the pieces for sustainability. They have the pieces to really make this thing into a multi-year, I don't want to say dynasty, but just a perennial contender, right? They have the quarterback, They have the weapons, they have the defense, they have the culture, they have all these things that contenders year in and year out, they get talked on ESPN, that they have all these things that these teams have, but because they exceeded expectations so much last year, I think it kind of twisted people's minds a little bit, like they're not going to be able to replicate this again when everything was in place.
Absolutely, and of course, the Bengals are becoming consistent, and even though sometimes the game management makes you think that things are not that well managed, or that they might be more spectacular. Maybe they're not going these long shots like prior year. But these Bengals surely look more mature. They look like a consistent team that, as you said, can do it for a long period of time, and more people are taking notice step by step.
Uh, Absolutely, man. Like I think just being in this situation last year has definitely helped, but like there's a sense of composure that this team has. Like they play fast and aggressive, but they don't play reckless, right? They don't find themselves in these precarious situations where they're getting penalized. They keep their cool, and that, again, a lot of it stems from Joe Burrow. A lot of it stems, I think, from Zach Taylor and just the entire coaching staff. Like I'm sure I would love to see these two teams practice, right? Because you have a defense that loves getting after the ball, and you have an offense that like consistently two hands on the ball, right? They are fundamentally sound, and I think that just translates into them being confident, being prepared in these games, and nothing really shakes them anymore. And this is the Bengals podcast, and Bengals fans have watched over the years, and Marvin Lewis, like them lose their cool and lose their composure in some of these big moments, and they can't finish these games. But I just think just with the total culture shift that has happened within the last 4 years has really just evolved everything where they're built for these moments, man. You just don't expect bad things to happen now.
And truth backs you up, John, because and we see it mostly on defense. When a player has been down, the next man up philosophy has really paid off for these Cincinnati Bengals, and now we can maybe center on the Eli Apple case, right? Because you have a rookie expecting to take your job, maybe, but then Cheetah goes down, and it turns out that Apple is your CB number one, and a rookie has to step up, whether he wants it or not. And now, looking a little bit ahead, we're finding ourselves with a couple of lockdown cornerbacks in names that are maybe anonymous for the rest of the league.
Isn't it crazy how they've won 10 straight games without their number one cornerback? Like Cheeto went down against the Browns and they haven't lost. And not only have they not lost, they haven't given up that many yards against the pass. Like the scheme in place with the secondary, it works so well. They're so in sync. Like no one really gets burned. And when they do get burned, most times there's pressure in the pocket where it forces a bad throw. We just saw that against the Bills, right? The very first drive, you had Stephon Diggs, I think, burning Cam Taylor-Britt on a double move, but you had Joseph Asai getting into the backfield, forcing an overthrow from Josh Allen. But Taylor-Britt, man, he really stepped up in this game. Everything really seemed to click in this one because he got burned again by Gabe Davis down the sideline, and he couldn't turn his head back to the ball to find it. So he did the next best thing, which is, okay, I'm going to time my hand going up into Gabe Davis's face right when Davis goes up to catch the ball. You just watched his hands. He read his arms and his hands, and he knocked the ball away. Eli Apple had 2 targets against Stephon Diggs in this game, both for the end zone, and they were lockdown coverage for each one of them. Like, it's crazy. Like, I mean, you said it best, man. Like, guys go down on this defense, and it's like nothing changes. It's like take one guy down, 2 more will step into his place. 17, 18 guys have played significant snaps for this defense, and basically none of them have liabilities. That's a testament to Anarumo. It's a testament to the coaching and everything that goes down with the preparation of this team, but also just the depth and the talent that's been accumulated over the past couple of years as well.
And big shout out to Jay Tufele, Cam Sample, that had really been available when their names are called. And well, this Bengals defense is something that deserves to be talked about more, because it's not filled with names. It's filled with men that are doing their jobs properly in a position that is almost disappearing with as you might think, which are the linebackers that are every time less used in schematics among the NFL. Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt are doing a great job, and we might be facing the sad possibility of not seeing them again together next year. But meanwhile, we have them. They're really putting up a show.
Jermaine Pratt in a contract year, man. He's been balling out, and I know he tweeted out something like I need to be on the field for third downs, or the third downs and the money down and everything. Well, he was out there for like 57 of the 60 something snaps in this game, and he really made a difference because the Bills did not do very well on third down, and like the way that they're utilizing him in coverage in these specific spots has really allowed him to shine and to display the growth that he's made just being in space. Like, he was a former safety out of college, moved to linebacker. The game was a little bit too fast for him in his first couple of years, but everything is starting to click, along with Logan Wilson, who really made those strides last year. And yeah, like maybe Wilson sticks around and Pratt leaves for a big money deal. He's definitely earned it, and I'm sure the Bengals would love to see him thrive for years to come in the NFL, even if he's not with this team anymore. But he's just done a great job this year. He's really proved to be a 3-down linebacker in the NFL, and those two just work really well together.
As well as BJ Hill in the line. I didn't want to leave him outside because BJ Hill has been one of the greatest exchange in the history of this franchise. I mean, he batted a pass yesterday again, and he's really contributing for a fearful defensive line in the Bengals.
Yeah, BJ Hill, like again, like a guy who was more of a nose tackle with the Giants, and then they trade Billy Price for him, and what a trade that's been over the past year. And yeah, you don't always get like the pass rushing production, but you always get someone who just sticks in his gap. The guys aren't running through him on the ground, and like you said, like the awareness for both him and DJ Reader to get their hands up. Like Joe Burrow's been plagued with like batted balls this season, right? Well, might as well just punish the quarterback that way as well, the opposing quarterback in this case. So both those guys do a great job of eliminating those passing lanes. And DJ Reader, man, I think he had 5 pressures in this game. He hit Josh Allen a couple times. That was so frustrating, though, to see Allen kind of wiggle his way out of some of the sacks. Maybe it was the product of playing on that slick field with the sleet and everything. But yeah, those guys got out after him yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always fun to watch that. So, John, now let me change directions and look towards next Sunday's game against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I heard someone, I don't recall exactly her name, but they said that Cincinnati was going to be serious trouble for Kansas City. But for what we know, the Bengals got Kansas' number. So are the Bengals trouble for Kansas, or maybe Kansas is going to be one of the steps on the way of the Bengals to get again to the Super Bowl? How would you approach this?
I mean, if you were to gauge, I guess, the fear or intimidation for both these teams, like there should be more fear on the Kansas City side just because of what's happened in the past year. Like, this game is still even, and I respect people looking at this as like an even matchup because like that those first 2 games, the Chiefs got out really early. They showed their dominance, but they couldn't close it out, right? And then in the most recent game, you had the Bengals getting up ahead early, but the Chiefs found their way back in the game because they're the Kansas City Chiefs. And when that offense is clicking on all cylinders, it's really hard to stop, even for a Lou Anarumo defense, right? They will get their plays, they will get their shots down the field, they will sustain drives, they will move the ball. And if Patrick Mahomes is good enough to be even 80% of himself, I'm sure that they will have success on offense in this one. It's what makes this matchup so even, despite the Bengals being 3-0 against them in the Mahomes and Burrow era. But when you talk about who's more confident, who has more bravado walking into this one, the Bengals aren't scared of anyone. If they can be undefeated against the Chiefs, there's nothing in the NFL that they can't do. And despite the fact that this is home for the Chiefs, and I'm sure everyone's going to be so on edge and fired up to do that, but like it's more of if the Chiefs don't win this one, then like this rivalry, this matchup is really, really, really far skewed to the Bengals. They just let the Bengals go to back-to-back Super Bowls on their own turf. There's so much pressure on the Chiefs right now, and like I don't know how the Bengals are going to kind of manage that. Like I'm sure they're going to find every viewpoint that they can to remain like the underdog in their eyes. They're going to try to feed off of that, but like the Chiefs, they should be scared. Like I don't know why they wouldn't be.
And of course, there's going to be a lot of similarities between these 2 games. I mean, talking about championship games, sorry. But there also be going to be a great deal of differences. What would you see as a big difference between last year and this year's game?
So I think there's still a small sample size with this offensive line. Like the Bills without Von Miller, not the greatest pass rushing unit. I think now you have Chris Jones and Frank Clark to deal with. Like I think the offensive line at this point is still a better unit than they were last year. But I mean, Burrow was under duress a ton in that Chiefs game, and so many of those plays that he made were just escaping Chris Jones by just a hair, right? Just extending those plays and keeping those drives alive. So the biggest difference is now you have an offensive line that isn't going to get Burrow that much pressured, and you're going to have Burrow get the ball out quicker because he's just so quick at finding his checkdowns now. So there's that. There's also, I don't see that much of a difference in terms of defending the Chiefs at this point. Like they have 3 games of tape on them. They have 1 game of tape without Tyreek Hill, and I mean the Mahomes factor matters in this as well. Like how mobile is he going to be? How spry is he going to be off that angle, right? Are we going to see 75% of Mahomes? Are we going to see 60% of Mahomes? Is he going to be completely fine by the time this game rolls around on Sunday? We just don't know. He's going to have to work through that, and it's going to impact what the Chiefs can do offensively.
And there's a potential in which maybe the O-line original members are going to be maybe back for this game. It's what was talked in the beginning with the Kappa injury. I've heard that he's not in the scooter anymore. And Jonas, well, his status is week to week, and we all know what Zach Taylor's week to week assessment is about. So what are you expecting from this line? Do you think that it's better that we keep on with the guys that went on to Buffalo, or maybe if the original guys are back, it'll be better for this OL?
Yeah, it depends on how healed up both Kappa and Williams are. Like if they're not 100%, I don't feel the need to completely rush them back out there unless things get like really dire. Like say they give up 7 sacks to the Chiefs, right? And it's clearly like the offensive line's fault. Like it wasn't just Burrow holding onto the ball, and they still win somehow. Then you have 2 weeks between the AFC Championship and the Super Bowl, and then you're starting to think, okay, how rushed back are Kappa and Williams going to be at this point, right? Like maybe you need those guys to be in those spots if you can't trust these guys on a week-to-week basis to hold up. So I don't think you're going to see either one in this game. I think it's a little bit too soon. Like poor Jonah Williams, man, two dislocated knees in the span of like 3 months on two separate knees. Like these guys are not mortal men. Like these guys are almost insane, and their pain tolerance is crazy. I think Alex Kappa is more of the wild card. I think he probably has a better chance to end up playing in the Super Bowl if they get to the Super Bowl. But again, we just don't know specifically the timelines of these two. I think you're going to see the same 5 from this past week in this one.
Yeah, well, and hopefully we'll get to that instance. And well, before we get out of here, I would like to know from you, how is the city right now? I mean, we got a lot of reports last year of what was happening throughout the city, the changing streets, and the whole atmosphere. Please tell us, now that we are so far away, and hopefully we'll get there one day soon, maybe for a home opener next year. But how is the city living it, and how it's different to last year's?
I mean, I don't know if it's like that much different to last year, because I mean, last year was such a welcome surprise, and everything was just it was popping, right? Like people didn't know how to handle all the success that was happening, but now it just feels like the continuation of what was happening last year, and it's great to see those traditions and those good times continuing into the next year, right? Like you don't see in the NFL a head coach fly back from a road playoff game at midnight, walking into a local bar and standing on a bar stool and leading WhoDey chants and giving the game ball to the bartenders. You just don't see that from any head coach at any level in this country. Like it's unheard of, and I think it works so well in the city because of how close knit of a community is, of how much they care about the team and how passionate they are. And Zach is just, he's giving that back tenfold at this point. So the vibes are all the way up here. There's full support. Whatever happens, but I think the city has never had the teams back as much as they do now.
And of course, all WhoDey Nation throughout the world is really enjoying it in the same sense. And well, we are kind of there, and we really want to thank you, John, for being being with us for this half an hour. We really enjoyed this talk. We're hoping it's not the last. We'll be more than happy to have you here again, and maybe talking about more Bengal surprises.
Oh, absolutely, man. WhoDey Nation in Espanol, thank you so much for having me, man.
Hey, well, see you around, and thank you, John, again. See you later. WhoDey.